The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the speakers or authors and do not necessarily reflect or represent the views and opinions held by the producers of this broadcast. The material herein is for entertainment purposes only.
Welcome to another episode of Scariest Paranormal Radio. We're in for another great surprise with another wonderful paranormal guest. Tonight we have Raquel Digati from Rhode Island, and she has done a lot of investigations up in the New England state area. She's also done a lot of investigations down here with me in the New Orleans area. We're going to talk some of her adventures and some of her scariest moments. Welcome, Raquel.
Well, thank you so much. Actually, the most frightening thing is that I'm also now living in New Jersey. So we have.
There you go. She's a Jersey girl. There you go.
I am for the moment. Another new girl. Yes, another new girl. Well, we've had some times, haven't we?
Yes, we have indeed. Yes, we have. We've had some very strange times. I still think about when I was up there, going into some of the scariest moments that we had in some of the cemeteries in Rhode Island. You know, I'll never forget the one we went to where there was this very strange, very creepy cemetery she brought me into, and off into the distance there was this area, and there was just this horrible foreboding feeling coming, just emitting from this particular cemetery, and
the gnarled tree on the mound.
Yes, it just really gave me the creeps, and you can tell them what it is, because I was like, oh wow, what is that back there? It was like Pet Cemetery or something.
It was in order to protect the integrity of the site, I'm going to leave specifics a little bit out of it. But the cemetery is an old family cemetery that dates back into the very early 1700s of a very prominent family in a coastal New England town. And it was previously on what was family property way back when. Of course, now in modern times, a lot of those parcels have all been portioned off, and there's, plats and housing developments and everything, as we've all seen, can grow up and around a cemetery, that was been there for a long time. And this particular cemetery, do you remember the Admiral? Do you remember the Admiral? Do you remember that? Yes.
Yes.
One of the descendants, oddly enough, he is not from like the way back. That particular figure that's buried there is actually from the 20th century. There, in the further as you go back away from the burying area into a path that leads sort of into the woods and it borders an adjunct property, there is a large mound. And many times you'll see crypts and crevices in mounds with doors on them. Those were previously holding crypts for when they had to bury people in winter, because in New England, prior to using machinery to dig holes, you couldn't bury anyone between Thanksgiving and Easter, because they couldn't break through to the ground to dig it up because it's just too damn cold. And so you would see that. But this particular family had a particular cargo and trade with illegal people and illegal substances, namely rum and slaves, as many of captains of industry of that early settling era were wont to do. And there I believe was there was a guardianship that I think more than one of the entities in the area kind of took, whether they were guarding, the old legends you hear about pirates, somebody being murdered for their ghost to guard the treasure. I think in a lot of ways, some of the foreboding you feel in that cemetery may have been past guardianship of illegal cargo, of, a lot of it, because those holding crypts were very popular all the way through to Prohibition to hide booze and whatever else you weren't supposed to be trading.
There you go. Yeah. Well, it makes sense. It makes sense, because it was definitely creepy back in there. Very
And
creepy.
I'll see if I can't find a good shot of that particular tree and mound to send to you so that you can share.
Yeah,
I
we
know
can
I
put that
have
on the
one.
site.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was bizarre. And what was really bizarre about it was like in the middle of like a residential neighborhood. Like
absolutely. It all
it's
grew
like
up.
all of a sudden there's this residential neighborhood and there's this really old cemetery just right there.
And you'll see that a lot in New England. That's one of the things I really love about where I'm from, is that you can be walking down the street and I think it was Glenn Fry and Don Henley of the Eagles that wrote in their song "The Last Resort." She came from Providence, the one in Rhode Island where the old world shadows hang heavy in the air. It's the first line of the song,
And
and I
they
quote,
do.
"They do, right?" So because you can be walking down the street, minding your own business, and as you're walking down the street, you'll see Dunkin' Donuts. You'll see an old-fashioned newsstand, the kind where you go in, you buy some gum and a newspaper, back when people bought newspapers, and a magazine. And then, the next thing you see a house from 18 something, you see a house from 17 something, you see a brand new store, you see a cemetery, then you see that it's all, there's vestiges of the historical all over the place. And we've mostly left it alone, which I think is a good idea. So you'll see that, like you said, it's residential neighborhoods, housing developments. There's a cemetery in Newport, Rhode Island that's in the middle of the parking lot for the post office. Next to a
Gotta
Christmas
have it
tree shop
somewhere,
and
yeah.
a really good liquor store.
Gotta have it somewhere. That's right.
Yeah, and well,
Yeah.
they just built up around it, and that's a fun thing to Google if you like, cemeteries. If you unusual locations for cemeteries, you'll see that there are in other areas that similarly had a lot of history and areas have grown up. You'll see that. Well, I think if you look on what is it? Is it Basin Street for St. Louis? When we call Rampart,
Right,
you go
right.
right over
Basin
there.
Street, yeah. Yeah.
And you're looking around. I mean, I've stood many times. It's one of my favorite cities, by the way, New Orleans. I got a shout out to how much I love it. You're standing there. If you have your back to the cemetery and you're just looking around you, you're seeing skyscrapers. You're seeing all the court buildings because you get into that central business district kind of area. It all just came up around it. And I think it's amazing. It's a testament. And I wonder if that's some of the things that makes some of the spirits very restless, because that's gotta be kind of strange.
Stay tuned for more Scariest Paranormal Radio.
Submitted for your approval. New Orleans. Seductive, magical, mysterious, and haunted. There is no place on this earth with as much ghost and vampire activity as New Orleans. Imagine, if you will, a tour that takes you to sites in the French Quarter of actual documented hauntings. The Haunted History Tour is just that tour. Every day, every night, all year round. This tour has been featured on ABC, CBS, NBC, and CNN, and it's available to you. Are there ghosts and vampires in the French Quarter? Find out by taking the tour that everyone is talking about, the Haunted History Tour. For more information, call Haunted History Tours at 861-2727. That's 861-2727. This is not a Halloween spookhouse. This is real.
You're listening to Scariest Paranormal Radio.
Did we go to Mercy Brown? Did we go see Mercy Brown?
We did indeed. You took me to the Mercy Brown, which is a very interesting place. Since you brought it up, I'm going to let you tell the listeners a little bit about Mercy Brown. I still have you on YouTube talking about Mercy Brown.
Yeah. I remember that. God,
yeah,
that was
we still have you on there. Yeah, we
that
still have you on there.
Hair day.
Yeah. So yeah, the Mercy Brown grave is one of the most famous graves in New England, and I'm going to let you tell them who Mercy Brown is.
I'd love to give a
shout out.
I'd love to give a shout out to if folks are interested in the what I'm going to call the Great New England Vampire Epidemic. There is a wonderful book by a terrific gentleman named Mike Bell, who wrote. It's called Food for the Dead. It's of the tales of the New England vampire epidemic. And it's kind of interesting talking to someone from the wonderful city of the vampires of Anne Rice, that at one time in the 1800s, New England was besieged by an epidemic of vampires. So it was recorded, because Mercy Brown is the most famous case. And Mercy Brown lived in Exeter, Rhode Island, and this is a very searchable, very researchable story. But I'm just going to give you the highlights. It centers around the consumption epidemic, or the tuberculosis epidemic, and she died from tuberculosis, and she ended up in a holding crypt. So that's kind of an important detail, because she died in the wintertime, so she couldn't be buried straight away. She had to be put in one of those receiving vaults, also called receiving vaults, holding crypt. And while she is dead and in the vault, her brother similarly becomes afflicted, and in his feverish delirium says he's seeing his sister. She's sitting on my chest and I can't breathe. If anyone knows anything about tuberculosis, you're not going to breathe if you have it real good. And so it goes to the point where they take his delirium seriously, and they go into the vault to check and see what's going on. And it's said that her body, when found in the vault, the hair had grown, her fingernails similarly had grown, and her teeth were elongated, and that she was fresh, in the sense that she had a flush to her cheeks, and that was considered, well, that's proof she's a vampire. So they took her out of the vault. They took her heart out of her chest, burned it on a rock, and there's great debate amongst the locals as to which rock it is in the vicinity of her grave. And then her brother was meant to consume the ashes to ward off and break the spell of the vampire. Well, he died a little while after that, because the germ theory was really more at work here than supernatural things, because of course at the time it wasn't really well known how germs worked. So you had people being allegedly taken by vampires in families of people being sick with consumption. It's because they weren't sterilizing, they weren't burning the sheets, they weren't they didn't have to avail themselves from keeping other people from getting sick. Right now, I guess contagion is something of a hot topic, is it not?
Oh, it is, yes, indeed.
So what we all know to do to protect ourselves from the spread of communicable disease was not really common knowledge in rural Rhode Island at the time in the 1800s. So that's when it was a very famous story. And there were other cases that were somewhat similar. Nellie Vaughan, she was probably from about 3 or 4 miles off in the same area. But definitely check out Mike Bell's book if you're interested in the Rhode Island vampires. But that, I've always felt that cemetery has a strange melancholia to it.
Yes, it does. It really does.
The air is heavy, and I wonder if and I'm supposing here. It's almost like you get a feeling that there's a very sadness to it, as if a young girl has been maligned through history, that that she's got this stigma of being a vampire, the Exeter vampire, they called her. Her heart was taken out and burned on a rock and fed to her brother. That doesn't
sad, very
melancholia. Sad. I don't know what will.
Yeah, that's very sad. It really was. I mean, can you imagine?
It's horrific. And although it's sad, now I can't. We didn't go to see Nellie Vaughan, but down the corner and around the street is another cemetery in that Exeter West Greenwich area, and also well documented in Mike's book, of Nellie Vaughan, and she's said to be very adamant. I have not personally had an experience with Nellie Vaughan. I've been to the cemetery. It's a beautiful pastoral cemetery, and love just based on the scenery. But she's said to get very irate and appear if people start talking about this vampire business, and she will tell you, "I am perfectly pleasant."
Wow.
Yeah, she apparently will make it a point to let you know that she is certainly nothing evil about her. And I wonder how many people got scared half to death by that. But
Now is she the one who on her tombstone it says I am watching
watching
and
and I am
waiting?
waiting. Yes, that's
Is
absolutely
that
correct.
her?
That
Yeah.
is her, and that sounds ominous. But
And it sounds like she is watching and waiting, as a matter of fact.
well, she's waiting for you to call her a vampire. She's not going to have any of your tomfoolery, you know. But I love that inscription. It's one of and of course uh, your listeners don't have the pleasure of knowing me, as if that's a pleasure. But I've been in cemetery, historic cemetery preservation for the better part of a quarter century, including managing and being the head trustee at a local historic cemetery here in New Jersey, as well as having been the fortunate to have been involved in grant writing and preservation in cemeteries up the coast. And I love epitaphs. Epitaphs are outstanding. There's the older, the better, the weirder. And that whole I am watching when you take that out of context, it just sounds creepy as all get out. It gives you the willies. But it's actually part of it. I believe the reference is biblical, and it's from the book, I think, of the book of Ruth. And it's, I am
Oh,
watching, because remember the whither that's where I go and thou shalt go, I am watching and I'm waiting, kind of thing. I don't know if it's in that exact stanza. I'm the last
okay.
I'm the last heathen you should get Bible verse from. I'm just gonna put that out there. But I do know that it is a biblical reference. So when you put it into the context of the ideals of like the Book of Ruth and whatnot, it isn't quite as ominous. But when she's telling you she's not a vampire and telling you she's perfectly present, and you see that on her gravestone, yeah, that'll give you a start. That'll
Yeah,
give
it
you a
will.
start. That'll start you hot, as we say in Rhode Island.
Yeah, it will indeed. But actually, I think we had some of our best scares together down here when you came down here, and
Oh yeah.
we kind of did our mass uh, little investigations that we did. We did like 3 or 4 of them in different places. I think that was the time I also dragged you out into the swamp in a
I was
metal
just gonna
boat
mention that to your nice
in
readers.
February. It was like January, February. It was cold, and I talked you into going out into the swamp in a metal boat in the cold to
With
look for the
armed
swamp
Cajuns.
monster.
You forgot about the armed Cajuns.
We did have well, you got to go with armed Cajuns. I mean, if you're going to go in the swamp at night, you got to go with armed Cajuns. I
Now,
mean,
let's let these nice people listening know that I'm not all that outdoorsy. Really, I'm not. I'm
neither am
not. I'm
I,
not.
for that matter.
I had never been in a canoe before that fateful night. And I certainly would have never even conceived of a creature known as a nutria, nor would I know how terrifying it sounds jumping into the water if you don't know what it is. Um, because that and many other misadventures that was something. And when you did the movie shoot and we went out onto the
Oh,
swamp with
that's
those,
right. Yeah,
those guys were so cool. Those really cool guys from the tour company who took us out, and
yeah.
I was such I was, what's the opposite of a rube? What does it make me? A city slicker? Not really. I don't know. You know. And I'm just
I
sort of
don't know.
looking out. And I'd never seen alligators in the wild. I'd only seen them in those stupid little things they put in the middle of mini golf in Florida.
Yeah,
You know.
right. Well, yeah. How would you have seen them, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
would see them. They were like 25 feet away. And I'm looking at them and they're looking at me. And I'm looking
they're
at them.
looking at you.
And I remember that nice fella from New York who was on with the production team. He and I were huddled together like terrified city slickers. I swear to you, I felt like Billy Crystal looking down Jack Palance when I saw one of those damn things. It was crazy. They were nuts. It was an amazing thing, I mean, alligators, banana spiders, and you're worried about ghosts scaring you? Jeez, those things are nuts out in that swamp. But I'll tell you, it's beautiful. It really was. The Frenier area was that. What a serenely, what a deep feeling place that was.
Yeah, yeah.
I really loved it. Well, I thought the whole and I forgive me for not always getting the geography in all right. But that area that we were into, that was Bayou Laplace, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was right out here where I live. Yeah, it was in La
Yeah,
Plaza.
right
Yeah.
in that area. And I've not seen too many other swamps. I thankfully have not regularly been in swamps, but there was a beauty and a uniqueness I felt to how that looked. And I've been through the Everglades. I'm going to give props to the fine state of Florida, and their alligator alley that I've been through, and on boat tours out there. But there's a unique beauty to the swamp that lends as the moss hangs, and those gnarled roots of those, what are those mangrove trees, and
No, those are cypress. Those are actually
cypress.
cypress.
Okay,
Cypress. Yeah, there's cypress trees here.
well, that's okay. We just have Christmas trees where I live. So and but there's such a unique beauty to it, and I think I think it all adds to the flavor, and I use that on purpose of the area. And I remember that you had told me, and I had also read in your book the story of Frenier.
Yeah, yeah, that was of course where the hurricane had wiped out the whole town, and that's a haunted location as well. That place has its own little haunts with the ghost of Julie Brown, who was a voodoo woman who lived back in the 1800s, and she haunts the little cemetery out in the middle of the swamp in the what's now called the Manchac Swamp, which was the town of Frenier, and that's an
What
interesting
a
little
feeling.
place.
You can feel it. You really, and
You,
it's
yeah,
not
you
just,
definitely can feel it. You can definitely feel it out there, and it happened. It really happened. I mean, it was hurricane 1915, and when it hit, she had died already. She had died, and they were in the process of burying her, and the tidal wave actually came up during her funeral, and killed, I don't know, about 100 people there, maybe.
well,
Took
it
the
was
whole
a
town
small
out.
town. Yeah, I was just gonna say.
Yeah, it took the whole. I mean, it was a small town. It was a small farming town, but it took the whole town out. And it was interesting because she always joked and sang a little song on her front porch, saying, "When I die, I'm gonna take the whole town with me." And that's what was so eerie about it, was that she prophesied it her entire life that when she died, she was going to take the town with her. And indeed,
Sure
she
enough.
did. It happened.
Sure enough.
Stay tuned for more Scariest Paranormal Radio.
Follow me, Kalila Smith, into the mysterious world of spirits. Searching for Spirits, the ultimate guide for ghost hunters, is a concise how-to manual for anyone who enjoys a good ghost hunt. Learn the history of spiritualism, learn what a ghost is and what is not, learn the truth about poltergeist. We'll also delve into the realm of spiritual beings that never were human, the world of demons, real vampires, and we'll look at some real case studies. This is a must-have for everyone interested in ghost hunting, from the novice to the expert. Completely updated in its second edition, this is one of the first guides for ghost hunting based on actual first-hand experiences. Available on Amazon.com. Searching for Spirits, the ultimate guide for ghost hunters, by Kalila Smith.
You're listening to Scariest Paranormal Radio.
I think that's one of. I realize you can have paranormal activity anywhere. I mean, I think we've all heard enough stories, and whether you've had experiences personally or not, I think we've all heard enough stories that it can be anything, anywhere. I don't think that you have to go, like when people tell me, "Well, aren't you afraid to go into a cemetery? Why? Because of ghosts?" No, because I think they're far more interested in places that they live than where they are stored. But I'm
Well,
not saying.
I want to tell people a little bit about this place that you and I went to, because I think people always had always asked me, on the tours especially, what's the scariest place you've ever been into, and of course I always reminisce about our experience inside the State Palace Theater building on
Oh my
Canal Street in
goodness,
New Orleans.
yes.
Yeah, was that crazy or what? That place. That place was probably the creepiest place I've ever been, and that place was amazing. I'll give the listeners a little background on it. It was actually the original. was a theater. It was a real theater. It was an MGM theater back in the 1930s. And people would go there and watch the movies back then, the old silent movies. And then when they got sound, they would watch the movies there. And then later it became a theater where they had plays. And then eventually it was used for a school. It was a business school. It was a beauty school. And we're talking a huge, huge building, huge, beautiful,
Oh yeah,
ornate Art Deco. Yeah, very Art Deco style 1930s building right in the middle of Canal Street. And I got a call from a gentleman, a man by the name of Vincent, who was an artist, and he was renting out one of the spaces in the basement. And it was weird because most of the places here in New Orleans do not have a basement, and that place had a basement of sorts. It was beneath the ground level, which was a bit odd. And then there were stairs even going further down than that. So there was an actual basement in this building. And he reported seeing some very strange things, and his wife would go over there and she would see some strange things. So he called us, and Raquel was in town, and they said, let's go check this out. And we went over there. There was like maybe 4 or 5 of us in the group, and we go into this big theater. I mean, do you remember how massive
it was massive
to go into this
it was
place?
And it was like I said, it was a full city block, and by city block, and literally like almost the whole block in every direction. That thing was monstrous. Yeah. It was beautiful.
Gorgeous.
It was kind of funny, I didn't know that much about it. I didn't know much of the history of it, as you shouldn't really when you're going in, especially me being from out of the area. I don't have a whole lifetime of history in the area to maybe know things ahead of time. So I went in kind of cold, as it were. And I know I've said in an earlier conversation, the first ghost you see in that building is how the ghost of the incredibly beautiful theater it once was. You can see so much of the architecture and art peeking out from the vestiges and ravages of time. Some of the plaster work is intact, some of the tin ceilings, and you can see what a majestic, beautiful place it once was.
Yeah. The beautiful. Remember the tapestries that were hanging and these gorgeous,
oh my goodness,
velvet curtains that were hanging on the stage still. Even though for many years it had been, the school, of course, and then it had been the home to raves. In the 1980s, they were doing these kids' raves there, these rave parties, and there was a lot of crazy stuff going on there. They still kept that appearance that it had, that you could see from its finer days when it was an actual theater. I'll never forget that, all of us standing in the front of the building talking to Vincent. And I remembered forgetting something. I don't know if you remember this or not, but I forgot something from the equipment, and we had set everything on the stage. And I went by myself in through the theater up to the stage to get a piece of equipment. And you guys were all up front talking to him. And I went through there, and it was one of the few times that I really felt afraid. I felt like I had 1,000 eyes on me from up in that balcony area. And I remember going out and telling you, I didn't tell them anything. I just said, come check this out. I want you to come, and I want you to walk to the stage, and I want you to just tell me what you feel. And I think you recall feeling the same way, right?
It was a very, very, it was sort of like you were an intruder at a party, and you walked in, and everyone suddenly scratch, turns and looks at you like, what the hell are you doing here? Where do you think you were? It was not friendly.
It was very strange. It was very creepy. And you remember when we looked up in the balcony, how it looked like people were sitting in the seats. You could see the seats up there, and it looked like people were literally sitting up there, like they were watching us. And it was so intriguing. And, of course, back then it was intriguing. Nowadays I don't know how intrigued I'd be to want to go up there. But, back then we were like, oh, wow, we got to go up there and look, So we go running up the stairs, and we get all the way up to the balcony part, and we have to see it. And it was so, where you got the real chill was when you got up there to see not only were there no people sitting in the seats. There were no seats.
Right.
None.
Yeah.
It was
You
empty.
swore, you not only swore you saw the people, you saw the seats.
Yeah, we saw the seats. We saw the
Yeah,
seats.
and I remember looking at you going, what they do with the seats?
Right.
Sort of looking at each
Yeah,
other.
everything was an illusion in that place. It was
It
so
was.
bizarre. I mean, I still have some. I got to find it though. I still have the picture that we took, like down in that basement area where that we took a picture of a bare wall, and you see this sconce, this beautiful lighted sconce on the wall, and it's kind of transparent, and it's this Art Deco sconce that appeared on the wall, and you can see that it's transparent. You can see that it's not solid. That happened. But I think the creepiest thing was that thing. Do you remember the thing in the dressing room? I'm gonna let you talk and tell about your experience if you remember the shadow
I'm trying.
person.
I do remember that. In fact, I want to say that there wasn't there like a partial mirror, and that was sort of like the bounce back effect. You could.
Yeah.
I want to say I saw it like out of. If one can picture this, and it's hard. I'm making grand gestures, which are really ineffective for radio. I have a face for radio though, so that's perfect. Um, it was out of the corner of my eye. It was almost like a golem kind of looking thing, and it was one of those where I see it out of the corner of my right eye, and I go to turn. You instinctively turn to the side where you think you saw it, but there was a mirror and it was behind me because the mirror messed up my directionals, and it was one of those like what wait what, and it was something. There was something that was there, and I don't think it actually left the room. It just we couldn't see it. It's like when you drop a spider, and somebody goes, "Oh, it's gone." It's not gone. You just don't know where it is, and that's
Yeah.
that. You can tell I'm not a fan, but it was that kind of thing. Sometimes when you see something like that, you see it and then you don't see it, and then you kind of go, "Oh, phew, it's gone." This was one of those when you don't see it, you go, "Oh God, it's still here and I can't see it." And that I felt really got my own adrenaline going. I don't know if your perception was somewhat similar.
Yeah, the part I remember, and I don't know if you were in on the deal or not, because I kind of, things got a little fuzzy at some point. Because I remember we had one guy that was from your group,
Right.
and he was kind of hunched down. Yeah, Derek, he was kind of hunched down with the camera, and then I had the guy that was with me standing up, and they both had these night shot cameras, and I'm leaning over, and I saw it in the viewfinder, and I said, "Do you see that?" And the guy that was in my group, he said, "Yeah, I see that." And he said, "I said, well, get a little closer and get a better shot of that." And he said, "You get closer." And I was like, "You have the camera." And I don't know. Within a blink of an eye, he slapped that camera in my hand and he pushed me in that room. And I remember the door shutting, and I was looking at the thing through the viewfinder, and everything was pitch black. And then I saw it kind of sweep across the viewfinder. And then it was like, now where did it go? And like you said, yeah, like the spider, like, okay, now I don't see it, and
But
it's
I
in the
know it's
dark.
not gone.
And it was kind of reminiscent, if you want to compare it to to a movie, that scene in the movie of Young Frankenstein when he's saying, "Open the door."
I just watched that like yesterday.
Yeah, right. That classic scene where he's like, "Open the
Open
door."
the door.
Yeah, because you're trying to be cool because you don't want to start screaming because you don't know really what you're in there with, and it is kind of like, "Open the door now. I need you to open the door." And I don't remember if were you in the closet with me when I got pushed in there, or was that?
No, I was in the other group. I was with
Oh,
you.
you were in the group on the other side of the door laughing. I got you. Okay.
I don't. Now wait a minute. You're right. I
That
was
was
laughing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it was funny from your perspective. Yeah, but so when people go, "What scares you the most?" I mean, that was it. That was my moment right there. That was it.
Well, you know what got me about the place, and I had a terrific sense of this, especially when we got to the lower levels, because it was odd that the lower levels were in existence in a structure, with the water table like it is when you're below sea level, to have
Right.
something like you said that goes that low. Um, I got an interest now. I could tell the theater had been there for eons because of the style and again the immense beauty of the art and architecture of the structure. But I got whenever I hate to keep bringing up the bootleggers because I've kind of picked on them a little bit.
No, you got to, because it's part of the history, and
Yeah,
that's
and
important
I
history in that
really
building, because
I
that was
get
part
that
of the history there.
guardianship there too. I mean, I'm going to tie it into, like I said, when you have the ghost guarding the treasure, the smuggler's friend guarding the stash. There was sort of a basically you don't need to be here kind of feeling, and that was a place that harbored illegal activity. And I mean, it's not much of a stretch to assume what the prohibition was, 1920 to 1933-ish. So
Yeah,
at
right.
one point in time, I'm sure a very large theater like that offered quite a bit of opportunity for the storage, sale, and or conveyance of prohibited booze.
Oh, well, yeah. A lot of that went on in New Orleans, and you look at where that's situated on Canal Street, near Rampart Street, which is near Basin Street, and all of that area is leading right up in there where Storyville was, and so all of that kind of tied in together to that area that was so popular for that kind of activity going on there, and at one time in the during that period of time, late 1800s going into the early 1900s, that whole area of the French Quarter, that was they had a lot of mafia activity there. I mean, that was all home to a lot of people from Sicily. That was called Little Sicily.
Oh
And
my, not the Sicilians. Oh no.
Yeah, not the Sicilians, no.
Reminder, nice listeners, my last name's Digati. My father's parents and his family are from Montemaggiore, Belsito, Sicily. so there's a bit of sarcasm I'm throwing out here.
Yeah. So there was a lot of that kind of activity that was going on there at that time. So yeah, certainly, it wouldn't be surprising. And there was always talk of particular underground tunnels on Canal Street.
Right, and that's very, very in keeping with that whole smugly kind of thing going on. And
right, and I always said, well, they couldn't possibly be that many tunnels out there because you couldn't have anything underground. But there you have that building with a basement, and then I remember that guy Vincent saying, well, if we go down further, you have this, Freddy Krueger like boiler room, and I remember saying, I don't want to see that.
There's a list of
I don't want to. Yeah, I really don't want to see that. I don't want to see that. It's like I'm good. I don't want to see the Freddy Krueger boiler room. That was like, okay, that's kind of pushing the envelope. I was like, I had enough. I'm good.
As the nice people south of the Mason-Dixon line have taught me, there's no and then there's a hell no.
Right, exactly.
Stay tuned for more Scariest Paranormal Radio.
Submitted for your approval. New Orleans. Seductive, magical, mysterious, and haunted. There is no place on this earth with as much ghost and vampire activity as New Orleans. Imagine, if you will, a tour that takes you to sites in the French Quarter of actual documented hauntings. The Haunted History Tour is just that tour. Every day, every night, all year round. This tour has been featured on ABC, CBS, NBC, and CNN. And it's available to you. Are there ghosts and vampires in the French Quarter? Find out by taking the tour that everyone is talking about. The Haunted History Tour. For more information, call Haunted History Tours at 861-2727. That's 861-2727. This is not a Halloween spookhouse. This is real.
You're listening to Scariest Paranormal Radio.
But yeah, I actually kind of got the feeling of the enforcer, and that there was a little bit of organized crime, and whenever you have those kinds of activities, I think because there's invariably murders. They happen. Not to be capricious about anyone whose family's fallen victim to violent crime, but when you're dealing with underworld activities, illegal activities, and you're literally under the ground, there's a variety of misfortunes that I think could lend to paranormal activity being kicked up a notch. Not to say anything about the nice Sicilians of the world being involved in that sort of caper. And let's face it, everybody in New Orleans, you all love a drink too, okay? So you got a pile of Sicilians, you got a bunch of people who love alcohol, and you got prohibition going on. Recipe for paranormal disaster.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, what's really strange is what happened to the building afterwards. Right after, not too long after you guys were there, of course, Katrina came along and flooded the building. The building was completely underwater. It was never, ever rebuilt. Never rebuilt. A few years ago, it just mysteriously caught on fire, and now it's just kind of a shell.
It's a shame.
It's been a couple of years since I've been on Canal Street, going up and down Canal Street. I quit doing the bus tour a couple of years ago, doing it personally. But, so they may have started renovations out there. I don't know. But I know for the longest time, it was just basically a brick facade at some point where you could literally see inside of it, and you just, you could see where it was all burned pretty much down to nothing.
I hope if there's a will, there's a way, and there's a buck to be made, that I hope someone who is able with the means to try to restore it, because as I said, that the best, coolest, and first old ghost you see is the beauty that once was.
Oh, it was a gorgeous
tremendous. Can you imagine being a kid and seeing the Wizard of Oz there for the first time?
Oh,
my mom's 91 years old now, and isn't that amazing? Huh? Miss Linda's 91.
Yes.
And she, she tells the story of being a little girl, and she saw the Wizard of Oz for its first run in the theaters in 1936 or whenever it came out. Somebody out there knows it, and they'll get it on Final Jeopardy, and I won't. But and she was like talking about how the whole theater just gasped when the color came up. So those are the kind of memories also that are made in places like that. I mean, people congregated in theaters in the Great Depression because nothing else cheered them up.
Right.
And there was, so it's such a beautiful piece of history. I do think. But it's creepy in there. I'll give that to you. That was definitely, all kidding aside, which is hard for me because I'm such a card, but that was terrifying. There were moments that were very frightened. I actually, almost felt like I was going to be run in by a thug when I turned a corner. And I always felt like something was watching it. And that moment when you went out on the stage and you looked in the balcony, and then realizing that it felt like, you were on stage and you were bombing. It was not good, and then you go, but I think if it was one of those, every time you thought the last thing that freaked you out was bad, the next thing was worse. I'm freaked out. I think I'm on stage and I'm bombing. We go up there, there's no chairs and there's no people. Oh God, that's worse.
Yeah, right. I know, it was strange. It was very strange. Do you remember we stood on the steps and we were shooting down the steps, and you could see these little things like running around at the bottom of the steps, and it looked like, I don't know what it was. I mean, it was some kind of little orbs or something. I mean, it wasn't human. It wasn't any kind of like a human ghost or anything, but there
was like a flurry of energy.
Yeah, it was weird. It was just these little things kind of running around down there. And, of course, when you turn the light on, it wasn't there, but, you on the camera, you could just see them, and they were just everywhere. And it was very strange. Very, very interesting place. I don't think I've ever been in any place so active. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if they do put something else there, what kind of activity will be there. Because, people think, if the building burns down or the building's torn down, that the building can't be haunted anymore. But that's really not true, because that energetic impression is still there. And from an energetic, standpoint, whatever's happened there, that imprint is still there, regardless of what happens to the physical building.
Sure.
So, it'd be real interesting to see that if that building does get rebuilt, because I would imagine if they rebuild it, they'd probably put a hotel there. I know you're familiar with this building, and I'm sure you'd be surprised that 15 years later, Charity Hospital has not been cleaned up or refurbished since Katrina, because it's been 15 years now.
Sure. Wow. It's amazing. And good on you, New Orleans, for bouncing back like you have. As you know, we were down there a couple of years ago, and it was the first time I'd been there since the storm. And God, you guys have done an amazing job.
Yeah,
I gotta say that. I mean, it's always been a favorite. That is why New Orleans is timeless and enduring, because it just, the spirit of the people and the spirits, both literal and figurative, keep that city going. And I'm just so proud of everyone. Well, I think it was Einstein himself. I mean, if folks are, a lot of the skeptic folk like to bring the science thing into it, but Einstein himself said that energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It can only change from one form to another.
No, that's exactly right.
And so, if you're not going to believe Kalila, and you should, and you're not going to believe me, okay, I'm dubious. Believe Einstein. We talked about cities growing up and around sacred places. It doesn't change that the place is sacred. Like the Hockomock Swamp. Remember the Hockomock Swamp?
Oh, that place. Yeah, that place was bizarre.
It was
that
bizarre.
Place was very strange. That was a very strange feeling there. And I think a lot of these places, I mean, I think that was a classic place where you had a lot of intersections of energy vortices, where there was just some intersections of maybe possibly even portals of where some,
well, you've got a lot of
our world opening up into other worlds, some other dimensions going on there. So, and I think y'all even mentioned that there were some, sightings of strange things that
absolutely.
That
There's a lot explained. Of cryptozoological curiosity stories coming out of the Hockomock Swamp. And for those who may not be familiar, I'm going to say it a little bit slower. Try not to let my New England accent infect it too much. Hockomock is what I'm saying. It's the Hockomock Swamp in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. Or as I say, the Hockomock Swamp in Bridgewater, Mass.
Well, Rocky, I tell you what, we're just about out of time. I want to thank you so much for coming on here today and talking about this stuff, because I have such fond memories, and this is just such classic, scare the life out of you kind of paranormal investigation stuff, because you start really seeing those things and these illusions and these full-bodied apparitions and stuff like that. It will definitely kind of give you a little chill.
Dry. Your mouth goes dry, the air gets hot, and suddenly there doesn't seem to be enough air in the room.
Right.
So if it happens to you, I believe you. I'm just going to tell you all right now.
We believe you.
I have a great parting paranormal shot to give you that may or may not make it to the editing room floor.
Okay.
One of my most favorite paranormal story is there was once an older gentleman who truly loved with all of his heart people that he found his family everywhere. He'd find people that he never met, and he'd feel like they were family. And he felt very much that way about yourself and about stuff. And that was my dad.
Your dad, yeah, Papa Joe, yeah.
And my dad left us on August the 29th of 2005.
Yeah.
Which many in your local area will remember as the day that Katrina hit. And leading up to that, my dad, who I don't think felt well, and I think was sick, and we didn't really know how sick. So his death was a surprise, even though we've been telling him, you don't look good, go to the doctor. And he didn't, because he was my dad. And so, but leading up to that, he was so worried about you and Steph, because he had already met you guys, and of course to know you. Remember her running into his arms?
Yeah, she was crazy about him.
She was crazy about him. Him. Yeah, he had the way.
And and I think he passed 2 days, because Katrina was the 31st.
I know he died on the 29th.
Yeah. Katrina
And
was the 31st, I think.
I know leading up to that, he
He was
was
so worried. I know.
so worried about you and about Steph. He asked about you all the time. Have you heard from her? Do you know if you're going to be able to hear from her? Is she okay? Is she and her little girl all right? Are they going in? How are her other kids? You know, he was worried about all of you as his own. And I remember you telling me about the tree that almost hit your house.
Yes.
And I think my favorite paranormal event might be, and I wonder if you didn't have somebody at that point, maybe he had to go when he did because he needed to be there to help out you guys down in New Orleans.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Let people know how to get in touch with you and what you got
Yes.
going on now, please.
www.darkerartsstudio, so it's got the two S's, artsstudio.com. Darker Arts Studio. I make human bone jewelry. I cannot ship to Louisiana, Georgia, or New York. So if you live in those states, find a friend somewhere else and work out something with them. But I have beautiful human bone jewelry. I do custom art. My email address is on there. Soon there's going to be Darker Arts front parlor tarot readings coming. That's soon to be. That's actually the first I've said of it publicly, so that's cool. That's coming. So definitely go ahead and check out darkerartsstudio.com. And my email is on there. Drop a line, say hi, tell me about your life.
Awesome. Raquel, thank you so much.
It was my pleasure. Thanks. And
It was
much
my
love.
pleasure as well.
And we need to make new memories and do new scary things.
Yes,
Madam.
we
That's
do.
what we
Yes,
need
we
to do.
do. We do
All
indeed.
right.
Thank you so much. Good night, folks. Thank you for tuning in and hope to see you next week, or at least hope you're listening in next week. Have a great night.